This is going to be a talk about a consultancy that's working on the Protected Habitat Farmers Mutual. And Andrew is really interested in that, the link between investors and farmers and how to build that trust. So, and the mutual is being set up to deliver that trust. Andrew Ward.
Thank you very much. I'll try and speak quickly and clearly. First of all, just to acknowledge how wonderful Dad would have found this. He's up doing graze plans for God. But to see how the holistic management community has grown over the last 25 years has been a real privilege for me, I guess. And I don't want to take advantage of that. But I do want to talk about a true profit, which kind of my dad taught me was not just a financial profit, which is measured by do you have a surplus after the financial period, but also an ecological profit, which we can measure with, soil carbon and increased ground cover and increased biodiversity. And I think the really interesting thing is that the farm stewardship, the practices on our land, they produce a benefit that wasn't around when Dad was around. So when Dad was around, you could take your true profit and you could enjoy it within your own farm business. And you could put it into a land deal and you could take some crappy land and regenerate it, grow more beef, improve the capital value of the land. And that was a financial benefit to the farmers that were practicing good stewardship. Now there is a market for environmental goods and services which farmers can also be rewarded for. So what are environmental goods and services? So carbon and biodiversity and habitat protection, species protection and pollution abatement. How real is this market? Well, the NFF tells us that they want agriculture to be a $100 billion sector by 2050. And at the same time, the CSIRO tells us that they want environmental goods and services, or they expect the environmental goods and services markets in Australia to be worth $48 billion by 2050. So that's potentially up to half of the agricultural sector made up from environmental goods and services. Or let's paint it another picture. It's the grains industry, the fruit industry, all meat industry and the cotton industry times 2 is looking for a home to invest in environmental goods and services. So how do they invest in farmers producing these environmental goods and services? So a singular farmer might find themselves able to approach their bank and be able to get an investment into a farm dam or a nature corridor and have the environmental goods that they're producing pay for that physical asset on their farm. Or they might be able to take it to the regulated markets or the voluntary markets or what will end up being the supply chains or terminal markets. There are all sorts of emerging markets that will come up. And there's lots of barriers now that have stopped farmers from participating in these environmental goods and services markets, partly because we think of ourselves as wheat farmers or beef growers. We don't think of ourselves as environmental stewards or environmental goods and services farmers. Plus the markets have been written top down by bureaucrats and scientists, so they bear no relationship to the language that we talk about. So we've got confusion and complexity and bureaucracy and a priority, and also we have brokers, and brokers are sitting there with a vested interest in keeping the supply, the farmers who are producing these environmental goods and services, disconnected from the demand, the institutions, the corporations and the governments who want to pay for these environmental goods and services. If they meet, if they have symmetry of information, that's actually bad for the broker's business. So what have I been learning when I've been working with Ethical Fields on the catalysation of a farmers' mutual that farmers can own democratically and helps them access these environmental markets? Well, a few things. I've learned that the environmental goods and services market stacks. So we're seeing that with the regulated carbon market starting to count co-benefits being cultural, social and biodiversity at this stage, but there'll be more. And we can see that there's biodiversity coming not just from offsets, but there'll be something like an ACCU for biodiversity come up. Perhaps it's Harry's NCU. And the other thing that I can see with EGNS is that it rewards collaboration. So one farmer might get an EGNS-backed loan for their dam or their corridor, but 12 to 50 farmers, or a group of farmers practicing the same way, can actually take to market and lower their transaction costs a package of environmental goods and services which might include some biodiversity, some carbon, some habitat protection and pollution abatement, and take this to the market, liaise with the market. And the final thing that I've learned through trying to catalyse this with farmers and co-design it with farmers is that we have to have, as farmers, a seat at the table. When farmers don't have a seat at the table in markets, we end up with things like the water market, which is highly dysfunctional. And I don't think that we can cope with the dysfunctional market being applied to carbon and biodiversity in our habitat and our pollution abatement requirements. So my encouragement for all of you who are the good stewards, who are the leading edge here, is to put your voices together into a farmer-owned broker and demand a higher level of credibility for the environmental goods and services that are put out into market, and ask the policymakers and regulators to fall in behind you and support you as you're pioneering this. Because if we don't get that weight at the table, we end up with a disaster, in my opinion, and we end up seeing all of that wealth flow out to middlemen, and we should be retaining that in the farms that are producing the environmental goods and services upon which we all depend. Thank you.